pruning, and I'm just going to talk about general fruit tree care, specifically what you should be doing in the summer going into the autumn. I will mainly be focusing on deciduous fruit trees, but I can also talk about citrus and berries and other things as well. So, and I can have questions sort of through as we go, but if they're really specific to your garden, perhaps maybe we can leave those to after, because we've only got an hour and I could rabbit on for 3 hours about this stuff. So, so we'll get underway. I'll just briefly introduce what I do and what we do at the nursery. So Waimea Nurseries is based in Nelson, just outside of Richmond. We have about 200 hectares of field nursery and about 5 hectares of container nursery. And we supply to garden retailers like Oderings and other retailers all across New Zealand. And we also supply to orchards. So we supply to apple growers and mainly in Hawke's Bay, Nelson and Central Otago, and stone fruit, kiwi fruit, hops as well, which has been really big development around Nelson. So we do quite diverse, do quite a lot of different things, but fruit trees is really our main thing. It's what we love, and it's what the nursery's been doing for 50 years this year, so it's pretty exciting. It's family business, 3rd generation now, so that's really cool, and it's really nice to be part of that and to be part of helping people like you grow food in their own gardens, which is nice. Just check that I've turned my phone off too. Yeah, so that'd be embarrassing. So, right, what do we talk today about pruning? So I'm going to talk about winter pruning and summer pruning. And it is really traditional, and everyone, the traditional is winter pruning is when you do your pruning, and that's the best and only time, that sort of thing. That's sort of changed. There's certainly a place for winter pruning, but summer pruning, for different reasons, partly around tree health, but also around the fact that our section sizes are getting so much smaller these days, and also there's lots of things we want to try and fit into a garden, that trying to keep the tree size down is one of our motivations of pruning, and summer pruning can help achieve that. So in the handout that you hopefully all got a copy of, there's a little bit there about winter pruning, been good for getting the shape of the tree. So it's, obviously for deciduous trees, it's a lot easier to see the branches during winter when it's bare of any leaves. So that's really good for structural pruning. Most importantly, really, with your winter pruning is doing it when the tree is young and trying to get the structure right when the tree is young, rather than leaving a couple of years. The tree might get a bit unruly, and then you have to make bigger pruning cuts on the tree, which is sort of to the detriment, and it's sort of a little bit riskier. Points of infection can at those pruning cuts if they're bigger. So winter pruning is more for structure and shape. Summer pruning, we talk about being better for size control. So the concepts around summer pruning are, firstly, winter pruning can result in quite a lot of vigorous vegetative growth from the point of where you've pruned, whereas summer pruning doesn't have that effect so much. It knocks the tree a little bit, so as we know, the trees photosynthesize and get their energy mainly from the leaves. So if we remove some of those leaves by pruning during the summer, we're removing some of this energy source and giving it a little shock, which helps to reduce its growth. So if you're trying to, plum tree perhaps will get to 4 or 5 metres tall after 10 or 15 years, and that is enormous in a 300, 400 square metre backyard. But with really good winter pruning to get the shape right, and then good summer pruning to keep the size right, there's no reason why you can't have a completely pickable from the ground plum tree. So it's just about good structural pruning during the winter and then regular pruning through the summer. So when we talk about summer pruning, there's kind of 2 pieces to that. There's a clipping of the tree a couple of times through the summer, but then you could also do what you typically do, your winter prune of the structure. The things like cherries and some plum varieties and some peaches and nectarine varieties which fruit really early in the summer, and then they're not doing really much for the whole rest of the season. So you could do your actual winter pruning in late summer, early autumn for those types of trees. I said about the tree health, it's really, some fruit trees can be quite susceptible to getting diseases like bacterial blast, silverleaf, canker, those types of diseases entering the tree through the pruning wounds. And we recommend really strongly to use a pruning paint like Biennial or Pruning. Biennial's the old product and Pruning's the newer version. Because it's putting a seal over the wound, those particular products are really specially designed to help the tree heal more quickly, so there's less time for that wound to be open and risk of infection. Anything sort of thicker than that pencil thickness, sort of, it would be recommended to paint and keep that sealed. So that's why summer pruning is much better, because when you're doing winter pruning, certainly recommend anything getting painted. With summer pruning, still a good idea, but not as essential, because it's during winter that those diseases are more prevalent. It's better conditions for the infection to get into the tree. And there's nothing worse than having a tree for 4 or 5 years, it's just coming into fruit, and then you get this icky thing happen to a pruning wound, and then it can be a serious problem for the tree. So with the summer pruning and training is sort of part of it as well. So with summer pruning, the idea is that in about December-ish, maybe December, January, you'd do a light clip over the whole tree and you would take off half of the new growth. So you'd be able to see, so for example, this apricot tree, it was pruned here, and all of this green coloured bark is new growth this season, so you'd cut half of that back. So from here to here is the new growth, so just cut that back by half. And as a result, what will happen is that if I had cut that there in December, that would have forked and made 2 or 3 new branches. And in, say, late January, February-ish, I would have pruned back half of the subsequent growth. So of what grew here, say it grew out to here, I'd cut back to there. So instead of this being like this long at the end of the season, it's only around here. If you regularly clip around the whole tree each summer, you'll really be able to keep the tree quite contained. Oh, I just forgot about the video Facebook Live thing happening here, and I was tree right in the middle of it. That's the concept of summer pruning, and the other piece of it is training. So and I was just talking to a lady earlier who's got a pear tree which has got all of this growth that's going up like this, and pear trees are really notorious for that. They really like to grow quite very upright, very vigorous and vegetative. So lots of leafy growth and not so much fruiting growth. And so, particularly pears, but any deciduous fruit trees really respond to having their branches trained down towards horizontal. And that can apply to espalier training, and that's the concept around that. But actually for any sort of standard, normal, freestanding tree, tying the branches down or weighing them down when they're young and supple like this, the branches will be a lot more productive and a lot less vigorous. So when the branches are upright like this, they're really growing vigorously and upright. It's really easy growth because it's really easy for the sap flow. When the branches are tied down like this towards horizontal, it's slower sap flow, it's less vigorous growth, and that helps to break the vigour of the tree. So you can use ties or a little bit of wood notched in here to weigh that down, to train that down. You can use weights. I think a really hideous one with like all these milk bottles with water all around. It was effective, but man, it was ugly. So there's lots of ways you can achieve that, and that's a way that you can keep this fruit tree small, try and make it as productive as possible, because that's what we want when we've only got generally have smaller gardens. We want them to be maximum productivity in the space that we've got. So that's summer pruning, that's kind of what we'd be doing around now, which is a nice time to be out in the garden. With winter pruning, it's more about structure, and this is quite a nicely shaped tree, and I think at the nursery we would have done this hidden cut. And so in the winter, that would have looked like basically a stick, because those branches weren't there, they've grown this summer. So that prune there has actually forced these branches to grow, and that's one of the theories and practices with winter pruning, is that you can make a cut like this in the main leader of the tree to force branches at the height that you want them. And this is probably a little bit high, and realistically this one of the reasons why we do this in the nursery is because the apricot trees can be so huge, and trying to ship them anywhere around the country in one piece is almost impossible. So if I had bought this tree in the winter, I would have pruned it about here, or maybe even lower, because I would have been wanting to keep the tree nice and small and compact. And with the stone fruit, we generally want to go for a vase shape, so taking out the central leader and having a nice structure of 4 or 5 main sort of scaffold branches evenly spaced around the tree to form the main structure of the tree, and then obviously branches coming off that too.
Would you flip that one at that height right now?
What's that?
Would you flip that one?
Oh, I'm going to, yeah. Yeah, if I can get my secateurs through this thick trunk. So the only thing with this one is that it's a little bit bare on this side. This branch is just hanging in there, probably not going to last too much longer, I don't think. So we just need to be a little bit careful that we don't end up, it's very, very heavy branches on this side of the tree and not a lot happening on this side. It's not ideal. It's probably a good one to show as a demonstration that it isn't always perfect. So this is a Clutha late apricot, nice for a cooler climate down here, late season obviously ripening. So what I'll just do is, we'll just pretend that this branch here looks better than it does. So I'm just going to prune immediately above that. I actually don't think these, sorry Janine, secateurs. Right, so what I've done there, it's a pretty rough sort of cut, being with these secateurs, probably loppers would have been better. The idea with these cuts, you want to do them on a bit of an angle so that any moisture sort of slides off, and I did it so that the angle was, I wouldn't have wanted the angle to be heading towards this, because I don't want any moisture just to slip down there and rot that single little branch that I've got on this side. The other thing I would want to do is, I've got heaps of branches on this side, which as they get bigger, a big one like this, I don't want 3 of those all on one side, so I'm just going to even that up, and probably, because this one's so strong, they've got another strong one here, I'll just take that one off. And this lower one as well. And because this one's so big and potentially could become really dominant, and these other branches are a lot weaker, I'm just going to shorten it to an outward facing bud. So what I've got, you can see all the lumpy buds all along the branches. I want to cut to an outward facing one, because if I go to an inward cut just above an inward facing bud, it's going to shoot the new growth this way, which is going to congest this open centre that I want. So I'm just going to cut there, because I've got a nice little bud on that side, which cutting there will induce that bud there to fire up and go that way. And this one, it's just a wee bit long and straggly, so I'm just going to do the same thing here. So I've changed, quite a lot of tree that I've just taken off here, but it looks a lot tidier, and you can imagine now how you could keep a tree to 2 metres tallish to be able to actually make it pickable. There's the other thing with pruning is that dead disease damage are the things you should focus on, and there's a bit dead there. I'll just do that to an outward facing bud like I've been talking about. So hopefully that one will grow up. Yeah, so, now this one's feeling a little bit left out. I might just have a few too many on this side actually, so now that I'm getting a bit carried away, but that's sort of what you'd be wanting to go for. So only winter prune for the structure for a stone fruit tree, this is the sort of thing you want to go for. Whacking out the central leaders, selecting some branches to be the main structure and evening up the size of them so that they're nice and even, so you don't end up with anything that's really dominating. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Really good question, because I've done a really average job there. So, if those that are close enough might be able to see there's the main trunk here, and then there's a bit of a lump, and that lump is the branch collar, and you want to go closer than what I have here, right up to the branch collar as much as you can, but not into it. So, if you cut into the branch collar, that's going to interrupt the sap flow that as it goes up the tree, and so yeah, the idea is that you want to cut just above the outside the branch collar, probably not leave a little coat hanger like I have here, and what that does, so this tissue here will then just dehydrate and form sort of part of the branch collar rather than going into the branch collar, and then that tissue deteriorates and goes into the trunk. Does that make sense? Yeah, thanks for asking that.
What did he ask, Kate?
Sorry? The question was around how close you go with the prune on one of these main branches coming off the trunk. Thank you. Has anyone got questions about pruning stone fruit trees like that? Yeah.
I just want to go to renovation pruning where there's really old.
Yes, I can talk about that. Yeah, remind me if I forget, I can talk about that. Yeah.
I just wanted to, how do you keep the cleanliness of your secateurs?
Good question. Yeah. Well, I didn't check that before I use these. So for cleanliness of your pruning tools, which is a really good point, I recommend using a methylated spirit solution. So just mix up. So I think it's 20% methylated spirits in grease water, and just use that in a sprayer bottle with a rag and clean your secateurs in between every tree, because the last thing you want to be doing is taking something through your whole fruit trees. At the nursery, it's what we use, methylated spirits. The guys just have a little holster with their spray and a rag, and it's just part of their practice. So no, that's a good question. And good hygiene, that's just so useful. It's just the most annoying thing if you realise you've taken silver leaf or something terrible like that through your trees. Here's a question down here.
I just want to know, are there any particular fruit trees, if you cut in the winter, cold winter like July, will be too late, or is it apply to all the fruit trees?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. So it's around, is it bad to prune during winter? Is it too late to prune in this sort of climate where it's quite cold during the winter? The only thing I can think of is citrus. That would be probably not so great to prune in a cold climate, because pruning will induce new growth with citrus, and you don't want new growth in the winter in this climate in citrus, because it's just such a risk of frost damage. In the South Island, we don't have to worry about the citrus borer, which is a problem in the North Island, so pruning during the summer is totally fine in the South Island. And for people who are viewing this online, if you're in the North Island, it's much better to prune as late in the winter as you can before it starts warming up, or in the autumn, so that's sort of on the shoulder seasons of the borer being on the way. The borer is actually attracted to the essential oils that are released from the citrus and are really highly fragrant, so they get attracted in there and burrow in, and I'm glad we don't have to deal with that in the South Island. It's a bit of a problem. That's good. Yeah, question here. Dwarf. Yes, good question. So dwarf fruit trees, so we grow a range of dwarf peaches and nectarine varieties, which they only grow to about like 1.5 metres and are perfect for in pots or small gardens. They can have very dense growth. The buds are very close together, so you get a lot of congestion of leaves, of blossom, of fruit. They're very productive. So my recommendations for those is to actually kind of treat them like a modified vase shape, like with these. because you can get a cluster of branches like this that are really tightly congested. And then you can get diseases building up in those because there's no airflow, and it's just really congested. So thinning out those branches, taking them out, it's probably actually as a winter job because the leaves are so dense it's hard to see in there. Thinning them out, those branches, and then actually it's kind of like it keeps going. So you thin out the branches, and then you thin the fruit because they can fruit so heavily they can end up with a huge crop of quite small fruit. And if the fruit's touching, if you get any rots, it sort of spreads from one to the other quite quickly. So thin out the branches, thin out the fruit, and then as it gets closer to harvest, you can thin out the leaves so that you get a lot more direct sunlight on the fruit to help sweeten them up, because often I've seen trees and it's like, oh, they don't look to have much fruit on them, and then you look underneath and there's like masses just hanging in under here. It's not until they start falling on the ground that you realise you've got such a good crop. So thinning out those leaves as well on the dwarf fruit trees will help to get the fruit flavour. That's not essential, certainly is absolutely fine as they are, but it does help improve them a bit. Does that answer your question? Yeah, great. Cool. Yes.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, if you have 10-year-old dwarfs, because they're getting quite large, they haven't really been doing well, can you do the same thing and just be... Yeah, you can. So, you probably have multiple clumps sort of thing happening with these. So you could selectively perhaps remove a whole cluster or thin out each one a bit so that you've kind of got an open centre like this and maybe 4 or 5 little branches. Yeah. Cool, at the back there.
I've heard stone fruit, that the fruit actually grows on 2-year-old wood. So how does that work for
Sure, that's a good question. So it was around stone fruit and the age of the wood that the fruit is produced on, and the effect of pruning on that. So for the structural pruning when the tree's young, I'm not thinking about the fruit at all. I'm thinking about getting the structure right so that in 5, 10, 20 years' time, the structure is really good and the size is good so that it's a manageable tree and a good, so you can actually harvest the fruit of an appropriate size tree. You can't, the different types of stone fruit produce fruit on different age wood, so we've got some more information on this on our website, so I won't go into it in too much detail. But so, for example, peaches and nectarines produce fruit on previous season's growth. So all of the growth this summer is what will produce fruit next summer. Whereas cherries, apricots, plums will produce wood on 2-year-old and older wood. So it's a bit of a mixture there. And actually within plums it can be slightly different by variety. So yeah, it is something to consider absolutely, because the last thing you want to do with a plum, say peach tree, is prune all around all the new growth off it coming into the autumn and think you're doing awesome, because that's where your fruit is going to be produced in the next season. So just you need to take a little bit of care like that. Yes.
Just following up on that, when you've got an older tree and you're just pruning one side first, so you prevent the fruit.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, absolutely, because there's no doubt that when you do a pruning on an old tree that you will be removing a lot of the fruit and growth. So to help to maintain the crop, you can do it sort of in stages, and sometimes you have to do that so you're not inflicting too much on the tree. Thank you. Thanks for that. Great, right, so I'll move on to a central leader type tree, and this is an apple tree. This is a really cool apple variety called Candy Crunch, Thumbelina. So they're little bite-sized, or couple of bite-sized apples. They're great for kids' gardens, and you harvest them really late in the autumn, almost in the winter. So they're great to help spread your season, because sometimes, through the summer we can have a huge amount of fruit through December, January into Feb, and then not much sort of at the tail end of the season. So these are great. So this is a tree that we supplied to Oderings in last winter, and you can see, there's even a little, actually I hadn't noticed there's a fruit up here. So this has got, the tree's fine, but if it had been pruned in the winter, it would have, if someone had planted it out, it would have maybe been a bit more branchy around here and not so much branchy up here. So like what I said around the apricot tree, where we pruned it here at the top sort of, and then it had forced these branches, that's what would have happened if this had been pruned last winter around here. It would have had a lot of lovely branches here, and then a new leader growing and another lot of branches up here. So that's what would have been done then, because it's so a central leader tree is sort of typical for apples, pears, cherries can be grown in that form too. And one of the reasons for that is because they produce fruit on spurs, and there's actually quite a lot of spurs already forming on this tree here. There's one here. It's actually got some flowers randomly coming out here too. So the spurs, which you can recognise by takes a bit of getting your eye in, but they have a bit more shorter growth, a bit fluffier on the end, that sort of thing, compared to a branch. So shorter, stubby growth like that compared to a long branch like that. Well, longish. So, just to repeat, if this had been during the winter, cut here, new growth coming out here, that would naturally actually form a new central leader, because that's what they like. They like to have a new leader, and then you could repeat that process and have a cut that here and have a new tier of branches around this point. So the idea is you sort of have a tier here and maybe 60 centimetres to 80 centimetres apart, have another tier and then maybe another one after that. And I know that sounds a lot like a sphalia training because it is the same, but obviously it's three-dimensional. You have branches all the way around the tree and you have the distance apart so they're not shading each other. And like I said earlier, training those branches so they're a bit more horizontal by weighing or tying, and you start getting a really nice structure. And the good thing about apples and pears is they're really easy. Almost all varieties produce fruit on spurs, and those spurs produce fruit year after year. The clusters of spurs get bigger and bigger as they get older, and you don't take them off, you just leave them on and they'll just keep producing fruit repeatedly, so it's a little bit easier than thinking about that with stone fruit with a different aged wood that the fruit is produced on. So if, an apple tree branch will have a cluster of spurs all the way along, so very productive in that space. Cool. Alright, any more questions about pruning, and then I'll move on to the care, nutrition side of things. Yes?
Ballerina apple trees.
Oh.
I've seen them being overgrown before, and not supposed to prune them.
Yes, that's a good question about ballerina apple trees. So they don't look too dissimilar to this really, but pretty much for their whole lives. So some varieties of ballerina apples, ballerina apples are columnar. They only grow about 30 centimetres wide by 2 to 3 metres tall, so they're really great for narrow spaces, small gardens, etc. They can produce branches, and some varieties like the crabapple version maypole and the bolero which is a green apple, are a bit more vigorous, so can throw branches off. So you can shorten them, take those branches off altogether. It just depends on what you want to do and how narrow you want to keep it. Yeah, generally they don't produce too much, but occasionally they do. Yes, yeah.
Do some fruit trees fruit biennially?
That's a good question around. So biennial bearing, where the fruit trees can produce fruit only every second year, more common with pears and plums. So what happens is that the tree can have a very heavy crop in 1 year and it goes into recovery mode in the next year. So to help get a tree out of biennial bearing or to avoid biennial bearing is by thinning the fruit when it's small, so to even out the crop. So with apples, say that you might have a cluster of 5 fruit set, or with pears, 5 fruits, thin that down so there's only 1 or 2 in a cluster. And that'll help ease the load on the tree and even out the crop. So it is hard taking that fruit off, but if you think, it's better to get a decent crop now and one next year rather than probably more than you can cope with in 1 year. Yes, your question?
It's the same question.
Oh, was it? Oh, that was well done.
So basically,
Yeah.
by thinning it, but for the trimming in the winter, it's just doing the same.
Sorry, can you say that again?
My tree is 1 year complete no fruit.
Yeah.
And second year
So yeah, the pruning is unrelated probably to the biennial bearing. Yeah. And just the timing of that thinning, there's no point in doing it late in the season. So if the fruit is almost ready to harvest, you've missed the time. The trees put all that energy into ripening that fruit. So for example, apples and pears you'd do in the lead up to Christmas or around Christmas, New Year sort of time at the latest. So that just when the fruit is, that sort of size. Yes, question there.
I've got a ballerina polymer, and it's the root. I'm assuming they're on a rootstock.
Yes. Yeah.
It's suckering.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can do? Obviously, I cut that back.
Yes.
But is there anything you can stop it doing?
No, unfortunately, no. So a question for others that they didn't hear was around rootstock suckering, and that is where. So just to explain what rootstock even means. So that's this piece from the bed down is the rootstock, and from here up is the variety. And the rootstock can help determine how big the tree gets, how soon you produce fruit, soil suitability, that kind of thing. So the rootstock that we use for ballerina apples is quite a vigorous rootstock, and what can happen is that when you've got a high vigor rootstock or the low vigor variety, you can get suckering. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do to stop it. So yeah, just trimming it off while it's young. Hopefully you'll end up, or when you're trimming them off, you'll end up having no more buds left for it to grow from. So it's unfortunate because it doesn't happen a lot with that rootstock, so it's bad luck with that. Actually, just on that, the dwarf peaches and nectarines can sucker as well, and it's the same thing. You have the clear stem of the rootstock and then the variety grafted on at about 60 centimetres usually. So below that is all, it's actually usually golden queen seedlings, and sometimes I see trees are like a huge big, normal sized peach tree along to the side, and then this poor little dwarf thing suffering away trying to grow. Yeah. Yes.
Any difference between self-fertile
and not? Yeah. In terms of no. So pollination requirements doesn't have any impact on how you prune. Yes, down the back here.
Avocado trees, would you just peel the snake out of the trees?
You have avocados down here. Whereabouts? Right. Okay. So in containers. Great. Nice project. To be honest, I don't know a lot about avocado pruning. I would avoid. I kind of think about citrus and how you don't want to encourage new growth in the winter, so I'd be pruning in the summer time after flowering. Yeah, that would be all I can suggest. Sorry for that.
There's a great website from our avocado grower called linwood.co.nz, spelled L-Y-N wood. If anybody wants that information afterwards, feel free to come and see me, but they have a huge amount of information on their website about pruning and care of avocados.
Thanks.
Quite a different specialist to deciduous fruit.
Yeah, that's cool. Linwood are great growers too, and they grow heaps for commercial avocado growers, so they certainly know what they're talking about on that. Yes.
Sorry, just the instructions in relation to pip fruit.
Yes.
Does that apply equally to citrus, or are there other considerations?
Oh, yeah, so citrus you'd actually treat more like the stone fruit with the open centre because you want really good airflow. Oh, sorry, I missed that on the instructions about the vase shape, sorry. So part of the motivation for that is with stone fruit, so you get really good airflow and good light penetration on the branches, and especially for citrus actually because being evergreen, they're so dense, and you want good airflow and good light penetration for those. Partly good airflow so you don't get aphids and mites and things like that building up. So taking any of those inner central branches out and wearing good gloves so you don't get scratched to pieces.
And the time of year for that?
Just not during the winter.
Not true.
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I really think you shouldn't winter prune stone fruit. So I'm thinking, cut some plants, wait till flower. So I've done that, but I've got some major branches I need to take out, and I do that in the summer.
Yeah, so how about we talk about the more established trees now, so that's a good start. So the reason why people don't recommend cherries, plums, apricots, stone fruit basically. Being pruned during the winter is about disease risk. If you are using good hygiene with your pruning tools and sealing with a pruning paint, it's not a problem. So it's not, and also, the other thing is good weather. So if it's going to rain the next day, don't do it. But if you've got a good spell of clear weather for 3 or 4 5 days, it'll be fine to prune during the winter, because I know it is just so much easier where you can see the structure of the tree. So with more established trees, just generally, the rules are don't take more than 20 or 30% off in a year, because the tree will go, lucky you, I'm going to grow. So, so you don't want to take off more than that, because you might just end up with heaps of subsequent vigorous vegetative growth, especially around the points where you've pruned. The other thing to think about is with older trees, you can often have quite a lot of dead wood, possibly diseased wood, and maybe damaged wood, that 3Ds, dead, disease, damage that I mentioned earlier. Damage might be breakages, wind, rub, that kind of thing. With an older tree, when you start with the dead, disease, damage, you might end up with your 30% of the tree gone and just doing that, not even thinking about taking any height off, removing branches, that kind of thing. So like we talked about earlier, sometimes it's a staged approach, not always, but sometimes it's okay, well first I'm going to get rid of all the dead, disease, damage, that's going to sort that for the year. Next year I'm going to take out these limbs which are big and in the way, something like that. And then the next year I'm going to bring some height down, so that you're not having this result of I'm going to cut it in half and then it's like 3 times bigger than what it was, and really difficult to manage, and the fruit's too far away then. So as long as you get your pruning, hygiene, timing, sealing, winter's fine. You can do it. Now if you want to as well. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How would you prune a tree that has multiple
Oh,
varieties?
yeah. Right, so double and triple grafted trees, so where you've got 2, 3, maybe more varieties on the same tree, pruning those, it's a little bit of free form. So, and because sometimes there can be, the different varieties can all come from the base, or, which is our preference, is you've got one variety with branches up to about here, and then the other variety is grafted on and it's on top. So if you've got a tree that's got the multiple varieties from the base, I'd just about be treating each, like even if it was an apple, which you typically wouldn't do in a bar shape, I'd be treating each of those as their own little bar-shaped tree. So cutting the leader here, having a set of branches, same with this variety, that sort of thing. If it's the one where it's one variety here, graft, and then another one, I'd treat it as a central leader tree and prune it like that. Does that help? Cool. Yeah, double and triple grafted trees are not my favourite, as you might have guessed by my response. What can happen is that one variety can become very dominant, and so you might find you need to prune that one a bit harder and let the other one come away a bit more. It is quite tricky to manage, and that's why we do suggest that instead of a double or triple grafted tree, you look at our family tree planting concept, which is where you plant 3 or 4 or 5 trees in the same hole, of individual one of each tree, and take off any of the inward facing branches and only have outward facing ones. So kind of in the space of one tree, you have a few different varieties. And you wouldn't want to put an apple, pear, peach and nectarine all in the same hole, but you'd have, say, 3 different varieties of plums. Choose them right, and you can have ones that cross-pollinate and fruit at different times. So in the space of one tree, you've got a spread. It's quite handy and a bit easier. Like, still a bit of work to do the pruning to keep them from getting too congested, but it's a little bit easier than a double or triple graft.
If you have a tree that's 3 years old, can you still train it to a spell?
So questions for posted in here, a 3-year-old tree that hasn't been trained but wanting to do it as an espalier. Yeah, probably would be okay. It depends on how big it is. Like a 3-year-old tree could be you know, if it hasn't grown very well, it might only be this size, but if it's massive, might be a bit tricky. Is it, what sort of tree is it? Is it very
I
big?
have a few.
Oh, okay.
The pear tree is the real problem. Like you said before, it's going straight up.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I wondered if it was too late to expel yet.
Pear trees have this funny thing that they kind of, if their growth gets stunted in the summer, they won't keep growing. So I would wait with your pear tree until the winter, because if you cut it now, it might just sit there and do actually nothing. And it probably wouldn't be that good for the tree to be sitting there not actively growing. So I would prune it in the summer and cut it hard, and then it's got next spring and summer to really come away really vigorously.
It's never fruited anyway.
Yeah, pear trees can take 3 or 4 or 5 years to produce anyway, so that's not, yeah. With your other, if you've got other types of fruit trees, not pears, there's no real reason why you couldn't start now. It's probably better to start now than leave it another year. Yeah,
Thanks.
that's all right. Right, I know I'm conscious of time, and we've talked a lot about pruning, and I had 10 minutes to talk about other stuff. So, info here about summer tree care. So I'm going to talk about nutrition and pest and disease prevention. Oh, no. Maybe I'll start with pest and disease prevention, because I don't want to end on the horrible stuff. So, certainly it's better to try and prevent than try and cure. So winter is actually the best time to be doing your pest and disease prevention, but there are tasks that you can do during the summer and the autumn to help avoid problems in the future seasons. So winter, basically general rule across deciduous fruit would be copper, something like liquid copper or copper oxychloride, a really good coating. So that means it's not just like a bit of fine mist over the tree. You want to put that on till it's dripping, because especially some types of fruit trees can be really gnarly and cracked in the bark and that kind of thing. So and the disease spores can overwinter in those little cracks and cause problems for you in future seasons. So good coverage, do it once, do it right, give it good coverage across there. The other piece is around the pest control, which generally not too much of an issue with fruit trees, but you can do a conqueror oil for things like, I've got here scale, aphids, mites, mealybug and thrips. So you can use a conqueror oil in the winter as well. The other main kind of, if you do that, you generally can keep on top of most things. Peaches and nectarines can be really susceptible to leaf curl in the spring. You just need to do repeated applications and use a spray fix product to try and get more, so that you get longer longer protection. So if you spray in the spring with copper to try and prevent leaf curl, and it rains the next day 20-30 mils, that coverage is gone, and ever after that, until you spray again, there's going to be no protection and risk of disease. So if you use a spray fix, I think it means that if you get 10 mils of rain, the copper will actually still stay on there. So that's quite a useful thing to do to extend the time and reduce the amount of repeat applications you need to put on. But even, must admit, even we do find it hard to control leaf curl in the spring. If it rains every few days, and even with regular spraying, it can be really hard to get on top of. Picking off, if you've got a little bit, just picking off the little leaves that are infecting, getting rid of them. And then it can just be a bit of a waiting game until about the end of October, when the disease pressure's gone and you've got nice clean leaves coming out. And the good thing is that peaches and nectarines do produce new leaves once those ones have fallen off. Pears, for example, they get a little bit of blister mite. Those leaves look like that all summer, so they don't grow new ones, which is a bit annoying. So that's the sort of some things about disease and pest control. So that's your winter stuff, and then in the summer, so you've got some things that you can start noticing now which are really annoying. It's codling moth. So that can affect mainly pip fruit, but it can affect other fruit trees as well. You can use a pheromone trap for codling moth, so you put this on in the spring and monitor it. You can just use this as a trap to control it, or you can use it as a monitoring device, and then when you have a lot of moths being trapped, you then spray with Success Ultra, which is a naturally derived product from soil bacteria, and it's really specific. It just targets caterpillars. So yeah, caterpillars, codling moth, leaf roller. So it's real specific. Neem granules and things like that are good to use sometimes, but they just nail everything, including all your beneficials. Whereas a bit more specific and more cleverly designed, things like this, it can be a useful thing to use as well. You can get refills of these as well, so you don't need to keep buying a new plastic thing every year. You can just refill it with new pheromone. So that's a good task for the spring. If you've got fruit with codling moth infected now, get it out of your garden. Remove it, because those bugs will reinfect in the next season. They overwinter under the tree, so if you can rake around, remove any fallen fruit, any fruit that's on the tree, get that out. If you've got chooks, apparently that's a really good solution. Have the chooks under there and they get the grubs out from the ground. And that's where neem can be useful. It does kill everything, but people do use neem granules as a ground application in the autumn, winter to try and get on top of codling moth. And then the other thing around removing infected fruit is other diseases like brown rot and stone fruit. You've got all that lovely powdery mouldy disease spores that just puff up everywhere, so you just want to get rid of that so you don't have that disease pressure coming through in the following season. And that applies to if you've got black spot on apples or some other stuff like that, getting rid of that fruit at the end of the season, and potentially raking up any leaf litter as well to try if you've got leaf-based disease problems. Right, so that's all the horrible stuff that I don't like to talk about that does happen with fruit trees. Your question here?
This year, my son called me over because he's a new gardener in a new property where they have 4 lovely fruit trees. And he said something is happening, so I came and had a look. I had no idea what it was, but it looked like the trees were just dying. After some investigation, it was fire blight, which in my 50 years of gardening, I have never seen. We took the trees down and sprayed the ground quite heavily. Is there other things that have to be done?
So fire blight can be vicious, and I did notice that I happened to be looking at the fire blight modelling for disease pressure in the spring, and there was a week of extreme risk in Canterbury in spring, and no one would have even noticed because there's not an apple industry here really, so there's a few growers, but yeah, it was extreme. Like in Nelson and Hawke's Bay, it's very, very rare to get high risk. Unfortunately, fire blight is hosted by a range of other ornamental trees like quinces, not ornamental, but also like dogwoods, cornus, all sorts of other hawthorns, pyracantha, and that's why in Nelson there's no hawthorn hedges anymore because they were just too much risk for growers. Really hard to control. In a more established tree, you can prune it out and it won't be too bad, but in a young tree it can be really devastating. You can try cutting it out and cutting out the diseased part, getting rid of it. We use a product in the nursery we occasionally get fire blight hits in the nursery, and it'll be one tree in a block of 20, 30, 50, 100,000 trees, 1 or 2 trees. That tree gets removed, all the trees around it, and one tree each side of it gets removed. It all goes into a plastic bag and taken away. But we use a chlorine-based product called Alpha-San, which probably, Alpha-San might not be available to you, but that sort sort of thing to basically trying to sterilise it. The only other thing that can be used is like antibiotic sprays, which obviously we don't want to be using. So yeah, it's a real tough one. Was it definitely fire blight? They weren't just dry.
No, it was.
Yeah.
It was.
They hooked.
We started by cutting the worst tree back.
Yeah.
And just leaving. There were a couple of bottom branches that didn't seem to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
These were not old trees. I'd say they might have been about 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then the next tree, all.
Yeah, it spreads really easily. So I think, so most susceptible are pears, nashies, quinces and apples in kind of that order. There must be a host plant around that's infected. So maybe moving to the prunus family, stone fruit, that will be safer, they don't get fire blight. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
With cotton moss,
Yes.
don't you put cheesecloth around the bottom to make the neem oil?
Yeah, so there is theories around wrapping the trunk to stop the bugs coming up the trunk and trapping them in there. I get concerned about, and corrugated cardboard with Vaseline and stuff like that. I get really worried about bark damage and people leaving it on too long and causing ring barking on the tree. It probably works, but there's quite a high amount of risk if you leave it on too long. So I try to steer away from that. Yeah. I can't remember. Sorry. It's actually something that's a neonicotinoid, so it isn't available anymore. Let me come after and we'll go and have a look and see what we can find in there. Yeah, sorry. Right, nutrition. I'll just quickly move on to that because I know we're conscious of time. So, there's kind of two things with fruit tree nutrition. When you've got a tree that is young and you're wanting it to establish it with nice, good, strong roots and good, strong branches, while we do really love the fruit and want to get the fruit, we should be focusing on the tree health and branch growth and root growth. So I recommend using something, just a general type fertilizer that's reasonably high in nitrogen, because that's what you want is mostly nitrogen for that, and a bit of P and K. As the tree comes into fruit bearing age, depending on what type of tree that is, when it's a bit more established, you want to move to a fruit tree fertilizer. I don't actually have a just generic fruit tree fertilizer, but those are more high. The fruit tree fertilizers are high, have some nitrogen, because obviously you need some leafy growth, but it has more potassium and phosphorus in it, because that's what produces for root development, particularly flower and fruit development. So they're the key, that's the key change really. You can also use, which I love, sulphate of potash. So that's for a boost of potassium going, and best time for deciduous trees is to put this on in the autumn. Because what happens is the tree, as it goes into dormancy, inside it, it's deciding whether the buds are going to be leaf buds or flower buds in the following season. And if you've got heaps of nitrogen on the tree, you're going to get heaps of leaf buds and not so much flower buds, not so many flower buds. If you give them more potassium, sulphate of potash, and there's this product, this one, and a liquid one, for different ways to apply it. If you give them more potassium, they'll end up with more flower buds compared to the vegetative leaf buds. So it's in the autumn that it's actually deciding what to do there. So if you've got more potassium at that time, so you've got to time it right, because once it's dropped its leaves, it's not taking up any or many nutrients out of the ground. It's going into dormancy and not taking up anything. So you've got to do it sort of at that later in the summer, early autumn, when it's sort of still growing before it's dropped its leaves, so it's still taking up those nutrients. You can also, it's a good idea to apply it in the spring at the time of flowering or at the time of fruit set, because it gives it another boost. It actually helps to strengthen the stems of the fruit and of the flowers and then the fruit. So that's quite a cool thing. You want to support that because if you've got any nutritional stress, that can be a reason why it can lead to premature fruit drop or abortion of the flower bud. So that's a very useful product to use. With general fruit tree fertilizer, it will depend on the product that you use as to how many times you apply it every season, but it'll probably be 2 or 3 times through the summer. Do a granular application. Yes?
I've got an apricot tree that I've had for about 6 years,
Yep.
and it hardly ever has any flowers on it. So
Yes, do that. Yeah. So apricot trees without many flowers. Apricot trees can take a while to produce fruit, so it could be 4 or 5 years until you see any flowers or fruit. Any further than that, you'd start to be thinking about nutrition like that. The apricot tree, and here you don't need to worry about lack of winter chilling because that's another thing. So you need a cold winter for deciduous fruit trees to induce the flower production. So, but obviously in this area that's not a challenge. And then you just got to cross your fingers that it's good weather during flowering. Yeah. Yes.
I seem to have rescued my lemon tree banana skins, which now you say it's got potassium in it. That's
Yeah.
why they like the banana skin.
Yeah, that from what I've read, that seems to be how the banana skin as a source of potassium can help too. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So you just made like a tea sort of thing, just so.
Just chuck the skins on.
Oh right, just straight out. Yeah.
Just put them on the tree and
Yeah.
come back.
Yeah.
It's a big photo.
Yeah. Citrus do require quite specific nutrients and micronutrients, so that's why that you've probably given a good boost of potassium with that. But the general specific citrus fertilizer will give it all the bits that it needs. So, and if you've got a citrus tree that's looking hungry, they do need regular feeding. They're really hungry, need good watering, deep watering, mulch, that kind of thing, because they've got quite a shallow fibrous root system and need a bit of help. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll probably finish it up there because we've got an hour. It's getting very hot. I'm really happy to answer any more questions because this needs to be set up for a baby shower. We need to move out. So in the shop, and if anyone needs any help with anything, just let me know. And thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you have a lovely weekend.